Hi, my name is Nathan McKenzie. I'm currently an Associate Lead Environment Artist at Playground Games. In this tutorial, we'll be creating a worn tarmac texture inside Substance Designer. Throughout this tutorial, we'll be covering creating tarmac stones, bitumen that binds them together, adding directional surface noise, creating a tool that adds cracks to your tarmac that can also be reused on any substance, and adding a road marking right at the end. If you're interested in picking up the project files that go with this tutorial, then check them out in the link in the description below. They contain the substance file as well as the marmoset render file that I used to render it out. So let's get started. To start off, we're going to be making our stone base shape for our tarmac base. So before we get to that, here we have the way I set up all my materials to start with. Is I put in a base material node with sort of the base gray value that you get and the roughness value, just a little bit high and a little bit of grunge. I expose the normal map, the AO map, and the height map. And then I attach a height to world normals, an ambient occlusion with world units, and a levels node just so I have 3 nodes for neatness. We have a 400 centimeters and a 2 centimeter height depth, and then we have the AO 400 centimeters and a 3 just so it's a little bit more intense, and the radius is super small because we're doing a tarmac texture, and you have the radius set to a higher level, then it can actually turn out looking quite gravelly rather than tarmacy. So this is the kind of how we're going to just structure this to begin with. Let's create our base stone shapes. So if you've seen my previous video, then we're going to structure this kind of the same way with our base stone shape. So what we're going to do is just put down a clouds 2. And then we're going to plug in a cells 4. And change this to image input. And we get a nice kind of pattern based on the clouds shape. And then we're going to change these cells to 85 and a little bit of distorter. And we have a nice sort of higher value here. So let's add in blend node and a fast white noise. And I'm going to overlay that onto my clouds at a value of 0.4, and then plug that in just to get a bit more randomness. And then I'm going to duplicate the cells 4 with Control D. And then we're going to change the scale to 90. Bring the distorter down to 0. We have 2 different sizes, and let's do a third. And let's make this 120. And let's give it again a bit of distorter back into that. So we have 3 levels of noises, and we're going to combine these. We're going to put an edge detect, and I'm going to put this to 1 with roundness of 0, and then we're going to duplicate this so we can just do this for all 3. For the middle one, we're going to do keep this at 1, and for the bottom one, we're also going to keep it at 1. So let's blend these together. Let's put a blend node down, and we'll start from the bottom. Plug them into the foreground and background. And let's put in a histogram scan. And use this as the mask. Combine these 2. And let's put the contrast to 1 and the position to 0.27. And then we have these 2 different sizes combined together. And let's do this again for the top one and our combined output here. Let's duplicate our histogram scan and use that into this section. And let's bring this down to 0.2 and plug that into our mask. Now we have 3 layers of sizes. Let's plug this in to a flood fill. And then into a flood fill to grayscale. The luminance adjustments of 0 and a luminance random of 1. And then put this into a distance node as the source input, and we'll use our original edge mask as a mask input, and we'll change this to only source and bring the distance up. You can see that we get this with the black outlines filled in. And let's put an auto levels in just to make sure that we're using the full range, which it looks like we are. Let's put in a little bit of noise into this. So let's do a slope blur, grayscale. And let's take our original clouds noise, but let's do a little bit of a blur on that. Quality to 1. And let's bring this down because we don't want to blur it too much. 0.39. And we'll use that as our slope blur. Let's put our samples to the 32, the full. Let's bring this down. Let's change this to min so we eat into itself. And let's put this at 0.01 just so we get a little bit of movement there. Let's put an edge detect in just so we can get our final edge mask. Let's put the roundness to 0 and the edge width to 1. And let's add in a slope blur. Put the samples up and put this to min. And then let's take a noise that we've already used. So let's take this clouds noise here and let's blur this a little bit. And let's put the quality to 1. And let's put the intensity to 0.39 and plug this into our slope mask. And let's bring the intensity down to 0.01. And let's duplicate our histogram scan node and let's put this over here and keep our contrast up at 1 and bring our position all the way down to 0.01. And this is just going to take us from this fine, consistent edge detect to something a little bit more organic. Great. We can attach this into our outputs here so we can see what's going on. And this is going to make our base for our tarmac. Let's make the noise and sculpting of our tarmac stones. So again, covered this in a previous tutorial, but we're going to do it again for this tutorial on sculpting these stones into shape. So what we can do is we can put a flood fill node. And then a flood fill to grayscale. Luminance random to 1. Luminance adjustment to 0. Let's do a little bit of a directional warp. The Perlin noise. Let's bring the scale the distorter, sorry, up a little bit to, let's go 0.27. Directional warp, let's set this to 50. And angle 89. And let's switch these around. So we'll go from that to that. Let's put a flood fill to gradient. Let's do angle variation of 0.83. And then blend this down. Sorry, blend our directional warp down as a min darken. And we'll leave that at 1. And let's put another one of these gradient nodes down. And let's go in and we'll leave that at 0.83, but we'll change the random seed up a little bit. So let's go with random seed of 3. And let's blend this down again on top of our previous one. Min darken. Gradient node in. And let's put our random seed. We'll just notch that up to 4. And let's min darken that down on top of our previous one again. To change this up a little bit, we're going to just add a gradient node in here. Change this to grayscale. And go to gradient editor, and let's add in some colors here. So I'm going to just put, I'm going to change this bottom one here to black. Put one in here in the middle, put that to white. Let's bring this up a little bit and move that up, and then we can put one here, and then just slide that gray value up a little bit. Move these both a little bit, and then get rid of that, and then bring this up a little bit. Let's bring our bottom black value up a little bit. Something about there. So let's add in a flood fill to bounding box. Add in an auto level straight after, and let's multiply this down. Multiply at a value of 0.35. And let's duplicate our auto levels here and just make sure we have the full range like that. And then let's flatten off some of these peaks. We can use a flood fill to grayscale. There we go. With a luminance random of 0.57 and a luminance adjustment of 0.37 just to bring the value up so we don't clip off every single stone. And then min darken this down on top. And that way it flattens off some of our stones, so they're not all angular. And if you want more flat stones, then just increase or decrease the luminance adjustment. Cool. So we're gonna turn this into its own node. And we're gonna tip here up here so we can just kind of bring our graph size down. So let's have a input grayscale. And let's name this edge mask. Copy that into the label value, and let's bring this into here. And we can right click and create output nodes. And then we can call this sculpted. And then select all the nodes, right click, create graph from selection. Sculpted, Tarmac. Okay. And then we can drop that in to our scene and delete those nodes. And then if we just drag in our histogram scan node into our sculpted Tarmac node, we get the same result. And to see this in play, we can actually just right click and open reference in context. If you don't have this enabled, it can be enabled through the preferences. And then we can see it work coming through the node input, going through our node selection here and into our output. And then let's put that to our edge here. And then you can see now have a bunch of angular stones. Let's add an auto levels onto the end of this node again, just to make sure we're playing with the full range. And let's add in a non-uniform blur grayscale. I'm just going to blur it on itself with a low intensity, 0.5. Let's put the samples up to 16. And we'll add in a few more blades. Go all the way to the top. And that kind of rounds out and flattens out some of our stones there. Let's just duplicate that so we can have two variations of this. Our intensity to 0.1. And we'll leave everything else the way it is. So we just want some sharper stones and some more rounded stones. And let's blend these together. We need a mask, so let's get a mask. Let's use a flood fill and a flood fill to grayscale. Put the luminance random to 1. And let's do a directional warp with a Perlin noise. Let's put the angle to 90 and the intensity to 50. And let's rotate that around. So it's actually the Perlin noise is going into the input and the intensity is the flood fill. And let's put a histogram scan node down, just so we can capture a few of these values here. So let's do a position of 0.27, and then let's bring up the contrast to 0.77, and it's only going to capture some of these stones and put that in as the mask. So some of our stones are going to be rounded and some of our stones are going to be sharper. Let's add in a little bit of noise to these stones. Let's put in slope blur and a moisture noise. Let's add a multi-directional warp grayscale and warp it on itself. Let's add a little bit of distorter to our moisture noise, value of 0.21. And let's put the intensity of our multi-directional warp here to 8.05. And then minus 14 to our angle. And let's change the mode to chain. And then we can put that into our slope. Put our samples up to 32. And our intensity 0.1. And our mode to min. And now we're getting some surface noise. And break up there. This may be a bit too intense, so let's just blend that down on top of our previous version, which has no noise on it. A value of 0.78. Let's continue adding some more surface noise. So we'll just bring this up here a little bit. Let's duplicate our slope blur. And let's add a clouds 1. Set the scale to 8 and the distorter to 0.5. And let's use that as our slope blur. Now let's change our intensity up a little bit to 0.03. And we'll set this to blur. And then we can blend that down like we did before so it's not as intense. 0.74. Let's add some more surface noise on top rather than blurring our texture based on a mask. Let's put a blend node down. Move this out of the way a little bit. Let's take a high pass grayscale. Put our multi-directional warp that we used before into that. Let's put a radius in of 3.51. Let's do a directional warp. Of this one based on, let's see, we should base it on, let's base it on this. Just so we don't get all the noise that we created in this node here. Let's change up our direction warp values. So let's put our intensity down to 0.98. So we don't want a lot of this. -88 for our degrees. Let's do an auto levels. And then overlay that down on top of our tarmac stones at a value of 1. Put this in. And then let's add a little bit more interest here. So let's bring that over to the left. And I'm going to add something in here. So let's do a blend. Let's add in a couple of nodes here. So let's add in a dirt 1 and a dirt 4. We can just leave these as they are standard. And let's blend these together with the max lighten. Let's multi-directional warp these. So we'll just take this and duplicate it over. Multi-directional warp these together with an lower intensity than before, so let's do 0.85 and an angle of 91. And let's subtract this from our high pass grayscale, so let's set this to subtract, put that in, and bring our value of this to 0.2. Let's add in auto levels at the end here. Make sure we're using the full range. Let's continue adding in some more surface variation here. Let's just drag these over and let's put in a tile sampler and let's put in a few grunges. Let's do grunge 02. So I want some vertical noise. Grunge 07 and grunge 04. Let's bring our contrast down on all of these. And our brush pattern up. Right there. Let's bring a brush pattern up on this one as well. Go a bit higher for this one. And then let's put this in, put these inputs, these grunges, into our tail sampler. We can change the amount we have. So let's do 5 by 5. Put our pattern to pattern input. put the amount of pattern input we have to 3, and then attach these in. Put our scale to 4.32 and our scale random to 0.66. Let's change our position random to 4.32. Let's do a little bit of rotation random. 0.05, so just a touch. And let's put some color random at 0.45. So let's directional warp this. Let's do a blurred version of it. Quality to 1, and let's put a lower value, so 1.29 should do. Let's directional warp this based on our edge mask back here. And then let's put a reroute node in this just to neaten things up. Put our intensity to 5 and our degrees to 90. Let's add in auto levels just so we're playing with full range. And then let's do a min darken on top of our tarmac. Min darken at a value of 0.71. And we're starting to see a little bit of directionality there, a little bit of directional noise. We can go in and give it some tessellation just so we can see. Add in some tessellation and bring the scale up a little bit. Let's raise up the level of a few of these stones. We're going to add in a flood fill to grayscale. But let's just do a flood fill to random grayscale and use our flood fill from back here. Let's do a histogram scan. And let's put the contrast to 1 and the position to 0.22. And let's do a screen. Just to lighten up some of these stones here. And let's put this at a 0.56. Let's add a little bit more variation into this before we move any further. So let's do a flood fill to bounding box. And again, use our flood fill from back here. Do an auto levels. Let's invert this node here. So let's add an invert grayscale. Blend this together with our histogram scan node. And let's multiply this down so that I can just have the gray values with the black outline. And let's put under histogram scan from this. Let's do a position of 0.2. And then add these together. That way we get some of these smaller stones and with some of these bigger stones. And then add that in. So let's have a look here. And I think this looks a little bit noisy. So let's go back to one of these nodes here. And I think it's this one here. So let's change this up to a clouds 2. So we get a bit of a softer noise. Put the distorter 0.5, and the scale to 8. And then let's swap these over. And that looks a lot nicer. Let's add in a larger scale gradient curve. Bring this over here, and let's add in a flood fill to gradient. And let's multiply that down on top of our tarmac we have here. Let's multiply, and then add angle variation of 0.74. And then let's add in a mask, and we'll just take this mask we already have down here. So we're adding it in, and then the stones that we're adding in, we're giving a gradient to. Let's see what that looks like. Gives us a bit of variation there. Let's take a multi-directional warp, grayscale, and let's take this noise from over here, and we'll warp it on our tarmac height. Let's put an intensity of 3.98. Let's put this to average, and my directions of 4. That's fine. And we can keep the angle at 0. That's fine. Just to give it a little bit of movement based on our height. Let's do another flood fill to random grayscale. Let's take this and let's change the random seed. Let's change that to 1. And then let's do a blend. Take our original tarmac and let's add that on. Add. Let's take this as our mask. So let's put in a histogram scan. And let's put this at 0.35. Leave the contrast at 0, and let's keep that plugged in there for our add. And then let's bring that down to 0.22. And then let's throw that in. Getting a bit of variation there now. Let's bring the value of this multiply node down a little bit. Let's put that to 0.7. Before we finish off this part, let's just do a little bit of housekeeping. So let's just frame off some of these sections just to keep everything organized a little bit. I'm going to just take this section here, frame that off, and we'll call this our base stone shape. And then we can take everything in this section up to here, and we can call this our surface noise. And then let's call this our height adjustment. As this is where we added in some extra height information via this area here, and a mask to say where we want this extra height to be.